You built a successful business, and because of that, you believed you could expand it. So you went after it. But what you didn't know, and what nobody told you before you committed, is that the market wasn't going to evaluate what you brought to that new space. It was just going to decide whether you belong there. And those two are not the same thing. I spent over 2 decades as a top-performing wealth advisor, leader, and executive, building and running multi-billion-dollar businesses. So what are you going to learn today? 1, why having a few clients in a new area is not the same as being positioned to win there. 2, how your current client and COI base can keep seeing you in the same old role longer than you expect. 3, why interest meetings and early activity can make the move feel like it's working when it still isn't taking hold. And 4, what usually shows up right before you realize the market never reassigned you the way you thought it would. So as you're looking to expand your business, you get excited about the move because it feels like a natural next step, because you've already built something real. You've already earned trust, and you may already have a few clients near this space. Not enough to call it a lane, but enough to feel like it's a signal. So when your plan comes together, it doesn't feel like you're stepping into something foreign. It feels like you're extending into something you should be able to capture. So you start bringing it to your current clients. You talk to your partners. You mention it to your COIs. You even start opening up more meetings around it, and you start positioning this offering more directly. And early on, it gives you enough back to feel encouraging. So you start having more meetings, more conversations, and a few early wins start to show up. And you start getting enough movement that the plan starts to feel like it has real teeth. But even then, something feels a little off to you. The engagement, it's not as strong as you thought it would be. The pull is not as natural. And then the moment starts showing up. You're in a conversation with a COI you had a strong relationship with for years, and you're walking them to the direction, and they're listening, they're nodding, and they seem supportive. And then they ask you almost casually, how many clients do you actually have in this space right now? And it feels like a reasonable question, and you answer it honestly, and then the conversation moves on. But something about it stays with you. Then a client says something that stops you mid-sentence. They're not pushing back, they're actually engaged. But they start describing what they've heard from other firms, the kind of work those other firms specialize in, the solutions they lead with, the way they structure their fees for exactly this type of client. And they're not saying that as a complaint. They're saying it in a way someone says something when they assume you already know. And then you realize in that moment that there's a reference point in this client's mind that you didn't know existed, because there's a standard they're already benchmarking against, and you're being measured against it whether you know it or not. And then you start noticing the other players in the space more clearly than you did before. Not because you weren't there, they were always there, but now you're seeing them differently. You start finding firms that only do this one thing. Advisors who have built their entire book around this type of client. People whose language, whose positioning, whose market presence says one thing clearly and completely. And then you start doing the math that you didn't fully do before you launched. The clients you're talking to, some of them already know those firms. Some of them have worked with them. Some of them are comparing you to them right now in real time without ever saying so directly. But you still stay with it because nothing looks broken, nothing looks dead. And even your activity, it's still there. And the cases, they still seem real. And the right response to a growth push that starts feeling heavy is a push forwarder. And that to you has always been true. That's always been how you've operated. So you refine your pitch. You add touch points. You look for the version of the message that closes the gap between the interest you're seeing and the movement you expected. But the deeper you go, the more you start feeling the difference between interest and ownership. And you can feel it before you can explain it, because nothing has failed cleanly enough to force the question you want to say out loud. So you continue to carry forward until eventually you can't ignore it anymore. So here's what went wrong. First, you treated your partial presence like proof you belong there. You had exposure, you had wins close enough to it that the move felt earned, and you understood the language, the need, the economics. And from your side, it didn't feel like a stretch. It felt like the next logical move for you. But knowing part of a lane is not the same as understanding how that lane actually evaluates, compares, and assigns credibility. You were reading it from the inside out, from what you had seen, from what you had touched, from where you had already won. But that lane was never going to judge you off the internal logic. It was always going to judge you whether you were built strongly enough, known clearly enough, and placed firmly enough to be trusted there at a higher level. Second, you underestimated how firmly you were already placed. You believed that your plan would work because of who you already are, but the people around it evaluate it based on who they already know you as, or for those that don't know you at all. Because the people that already knew you were not meeting you for the first time. They already had a category for you. They knew where you fit in their world. So even if they liked the move, respected the value you were going to bring, or supported the idea, that didn't mean they were going to move you up with it. And that people who didn't know you weren't going to give you the benefit of your own story. They were meeting you against what already existed in that lane, against other people who looked more established than you were there, more complete, more natural. That meant the move that you were trying to make was running into two problems at once. Existing relationships of yours that were slower to reassign you than you expected, and new relationships were colder than you expected because they were comparing you against whoever already looked like the obvious choice. And third, you mistook adjacency for ownership. You were close enough to the business to believe the lane should start carrying once you lean into it. And because the activity stayed alive, it was easy to stay encouraged because you got meetings, you got interest, you got enough engagement to keep the move feeling credible. Maybe even enough to tell yourself it just needed more time. But none of that meant the role was actually changing. The activity stayed alive while the role stayed the same. And the lane remained available without becoming yours. Because people could engage without reassigning you, stay interested without moving you up, and agree the value was real without experiencing you as a natural home fit for it. Because what looked like traction to you was exposure arriving slowly enough to keep your belief intact. And that's why this gets expensive. Not because nothing happened, because enough happened to keep you in a move that never fully took hold. You didn't just overestimate this opportunity. You overestimated how naturally the opportunity would start organizing around you. And here's what makes this the most expensive assumption in this business. It doesn't just announce itself. There's no meeting that goes badly enough to force the truth. No relationships that break. No moment where someone sits across from you and tells you what the market actually has decided. It just quietly runs out of the room. And that traction that looked like momentum early on stops compounding. The interest that felt real never converts the way you expected. And the initiative that was supposed to change the trajectory of your business becomes something you offer, a capability, a line item, instead of something that actually moves your business forward. And by the time that's clear, you've already spent what you've had to make the move work. The time, the relationships you leaned on, the internal energy, the confidence that only comes from a launch that builds the way you believe this one would. And the hardest part isn't the cost. It's that you still don't fully understand what happened. Because nothing broke. Nobody told you, and the plan still sounded right when you describe it. But the market, it made its call at the beginning based on where it actually placed you. And everything after that was you working against a decision you didn't know had already been made. And that's the miss. And it was sitting there before the first conversation ever happened. And this is a line I always watch for. Not whether the plan is good, not whether the opportunity is real, and not whether the effort is there. It's whether you understand how the market is going to place you before you commit to expanding into it. Because if that gap between how you see yourself and where the market places you isn't closed before you go in, you'll find it on the back end every time. Because success doesn't protect you from this. Because in some ways, success makes it harder for you to say. Because the confidence comes from building something real. It's the same confidence that makes this assumption feel like certainty. And at EliteVate, this is a line we watch very closely. Because in a world full of information, people choose authority and protection from being wrong at the most expensive moments. Every week, I break down the real strategies behind the top performers for wealth advisors and leaders ready to operate the level they're built for. This is EliteVate. We cut through the fluff, no hype, no theory, just strategy, psychology, and execution. If this hits home, subscribe. You're not just watching and learning. You will become the model others follow.